Hello there, and welcome to the Business of Story. I'm your host, Park Howell, and author of Brand Bewitchery, which shows you how to clarify your purpose-driven brand story, and maybe even more importantly, how to share it with the world. You can grab your copy right now on Amazon or Apple Books. And if you're like me, you'll be adding Brand Bewitchery to a vast library of sales and marketing books. I mean, to stay ahead of the competition in this day and age, what do you got to read? 10, 20, 30 books a year, it seems like, just to be and remain out front. Well, I took that into consideration when I wrote Brand Bewitchery, and that's why in every single chapter I have exercises in it so that you can start applying the wisdom of the book immediately to your brand to help you, again, clarify your story, amplify your impact, and ultimately simplify your life. My goal is to help you absolutely excel through the stories you tell. It's timely now because on today's show, we have a superhuman in sales and marketing book consumption. Douglas Burdett, the host of the Marketing Book Podcast. He consumes a book a week and then interviews the author on his highly, highly rated show. In fact, it has just eclipsed the 2 million download mark for a show. I mean, that is quite an achievement. Douglas will share with you his insights on industry trends gleaned from his readings, and he'll offer some surprising must-haves for your library. All that and more in just a moment. But first, I want to start with your story marketing moment. In our last 2 episodes, I started taking you through the story cycle system to help you craft and tell compelling stories that sell. In episode 287, we focused on your backstory, which sets the stage for your brand narrative. Your backstory is when you define your market position statement that describes what you do differently and more distinctively than your competition. Essentially, you declare what you stand for that helps you stand out in the noisy world we all compete in. Last week, we covered step 2 of the story cycle system called heroes. This is when you prioritize your top 3 customers and then focus on your number 1 audience. Today, the story marketing moment is about stakes. What's at stake for your customer? What do they wish for and want to have to better their lives? Because you, like all brands, are in the wish-granting business, get super clear on what your customer emotionally wishes for in their life. For instance, if you're selling toothpaste, does your customer wish for the self-confidence that comes with a beautiful smile, flashing their pearly whites? If you're selling software as a service to your business-to-business customers, what do they emotionally wish to achieve with the use of your product? Is it peace of mind that you are freeing them from arduous tasks through a simple user interface? Are you amping up their optimism because their teams are more productive and sales will increase? What do they wish for? If you're a leadership coach, are you fulfilling their wish to look smart, increasing their confidence through enhanced competencies, or helping them feel the camaraderie working with their colleagues? So take the time to really understand and empathize with them. Get into their heart so you know what it takes to fulfill that emotional wish, because that's the story you want to tell. Their want is simply the physical thing they will buy from you, your product or your service, that helps them fulfill their wish. Remember, your story is not about what you make, but what you make happen in your customer's life. The fulfillment of their wish, because we all, as providers of anything, are in the wish-granting business. And I think that's pretty cool, actually. If I can help you clarify your story to amplify your impact and even simplify your life, grab your copy of Brand Bewitchery right now. You can also take my online course at businessofstory.thinkific.com and do it yourself. Or, better yet, you can enroll in an upcoming Build a Better Brand Story Sprint where you get both of those amazing resources, plus 6 live sessions with me and 9 of your fellow brand story sprinters over 3 weeks. So if you have a wish to feel the exhilaration of excelling through the stories you tell, I'm here ready to grant that wish for you. Speaking of granting wishes, mine came true when Douglas Burdett said yes to coming on my show today. He is a marketing wizard and splendid gentleman who literally lights up the world of everyone he touches. He is so much fun to be around. So in our interview, I, of course, posed the one question that appears to follow him everywhere.
And what is the one book, Doug? What is the one book I should read? What's the best book And I'm making fun of that question because there's no context. So people really do ask me that all the time. And I say, well, what challenges do you have? Or, what do you want to learn more about? And then I'm able to pick out, I don't want somebody like Park Howell to have to read 300 books. If there's one or two that I can put you on immediately, again, I like to help people. So I'll say it's Sarah. I say, was it a book by Seth Godin or David Meerman Scott or Philip Kotler, the father of modern marketing? Well, they all write spectacular books, and many other authors do too. But
so I left that but in Douglas's response hanging there because I wanted to leave his surprising answer for you about his favorite book later in the show. Douglas Burdett is founder principal of Artillery, a manufacturing marketing agency in Norfolk, Virginia. His marketing book podcast was named by LinkedIn as one of the 10 podcasts that will make you a better marketer, and by Forbes as one of the 11 smart podcasts that will keep you in the know. Prior to starting his own firm, Douglas worked in New York City on Madison Avenue at ad industry giants J. Walter Thompson and Gray Advertising. Before starting his own business career, Douglas served as a U.S. Army artillery officer overseas for 3 years and then earned an MBA. I guess that explains the name of his agency. Anyway, please welcome to the show Douglas Burdett and our conversation already in progress. Really happy to have you here.
The invitation to be a guest on your podcast. I hope I don't disappoint all your storytelling expert listeners. So we may want to put a disclaimer in there. No, I'm just kidding. But
Douglas, I think you are a natural born storyteller. I mean, I just think it comes with the territory with you.
Okay. Well, if I tell a story, if I miss something, just debrief me later. No, I'm kidding. How many parts were in Campbell's monomyth?
Well, depending on who you believe, it's anywhere from 12 to 17 on how you dissect that. So, yeah, it just depends on how much nuance you want to throw at people, I guess.
Okay, I was just looking up. I've had, at least a half dozen books on the show about storytelling. If you ask me, I'm going to have to refer back to my list.
No problem. How many episodes do you have now?
Well, with authors of interviewing them about their books that I read, it's Friday. It's episode 310.
Yeah,
but I did 66 of the authors in quarantine getting cocktails. So
until your liver couldn't take it anymore.
That's right.
Yeah. Sorry, I missed that round. That would have been fun. I'm still drinking the cocktails regardless.
Well, I had a very nice bottle of red wine after my interview with you, and Park Howell, as I mentioned, you were the only author that ever sent me anything to drink. And just last week, I got a bottle from Jim Stern, who I interviewed 2 years ago about his book,
The Educated Guess.
Yes. So this is
wine.
A label and a brand considered almost as carefully as the brand you sent me.
Well, yeah. I mean, how lucky did I get sending you a bottle of Storyteller wine?
Yes.
So,
yes.
Yeah, it worked out pretty well.
Yeah. Are there any specific questions you're going to ask me, or is it?
Oh, I've got some.
Okay.
I've got plenty of specific questions. Not that I. No, I just want you to wing it.
Okay.
You had a midlife crisis and went into stand-up comedy. So I'm assuming that you've got this whole impromptu thing down.
Oh, gosh, pressure's on. And then recently I took a 6 weeks comedy boot camp for veterans put on by the Armed Services.
How'd that go?
Well, it was torture because you weren't getting the feedback from.
So it was all online, all virtual.
All virtual. And I would prepare all these jokes and I would, we'd work on them each week. And it was really, and they would kind of tear apart all the jokes, which, was instructive. But my question was, but are these jokes even funny? That part was missing.
You had to be the judge of that, yes. Which is kind of weird, right?
Yeah. Because otherwise everyone's sitting there going, like when you're talking to somebody on Zoom and everyone's checking Facebook. Yeah. So.
Well, Zoom is very much like a Turkish prison camp visit. Your loved one is on one side of the plastic glass and you're on the other and you're trying to connect.
Oh, man. Turkish prison. That suddenly brought me back to the movie Midnight Express which of course reminds me of my 4 years at the Virginia Military Institute. But that's what therapists are for, okay?
Exactly right. Exactly right. Douglas Burdett, welcome to the Business of Story.
Park Howell, I've been a fan for years, fan of yours for years. So I'm really honored and delighted to be here. And I hope I'm worthy of your audience and am able to do as well as your other guests that you've had on the show.
I am not remotely worried about that. So my first big question for you is the one that I cannot possibly fathom the answer to.
Okay, I already know what you're going to ask. And the answer is those charges were dropped. Okay, there's a difference between being indicted and convicted. We can go into that later. Please, go ahead.
All right, we'll cover that at the end of the show. You, as host of the Marketing Book Podcast, which thank you again for having me on episode 290. I so appreciate that.
I'd been waiting for years to get you on the show.
You had been sending me notes every year for about 4 years saying, dude, where's your book? Yeah, so you were the prompt, I was writing and my wife was like, it's 4 a.m. Why are you still writing your book? I said, well, I got to get on Doug's show and he's been asking me for it. So,
and then I was able to cross off a big item on my to-do list once I was able to.
Yeah. Well, I did too. She goes, but what about publishing it and all of those sales and royalties? And no, it's getting on Doug's show. That's why I'm finishing this damn book.
I'll take it.
But you, as the host of Marketing Book Podcast, must have read more marketing books than anybody in the history of advertising and marketing.
Oh, I don't know. I'm sure there's some academics out there, but what we're getting at is that I have published over 300 episodes. And when I did about my first 10 episodes, these were books I had already read and a lot of authors I had already met, at conferences, not that they remembered me. And then it got into about the 10th episode and I was reading the book and then I realized I'm actually going to need to read each one of these books before an interview. And so it was sort of like taking the wrong exit on an interstate where you can't turn around for another half an hour. So it's like, well, I guess I'm going to be reading a book every week. I didn't think that through, Park Howell. Just for any of your listeners that are thinking about doing a similar kind of thing, it's had a lot of rewards for me, but I did not realize I was going to need to read each book. And the downsides have been many. It's really kind of into my Scotch drinking, for instance. So I've had over 300 books on the show, and I love doing it. I'm so excited to be able to read a book like yours and then talk to the author. I would do that even if I didn't, have my own business or whatever I was doing, I would still want to do this. And so then, I had always read some books because I found it really helpful for my professional, career. And most people who read books about business occasionally, they find it helpful too. And so it's probably, I don't know, maybe close to 400 because there's been books that I'll read and then, oh my gosh, they were awful. And I didn't put them on the show. Or I would have read a book and the interview was absolutely awful. It didn't reflect well on the author. It didn't, the listeners weren't going to enjoy it. I wasn't proud of it. So, but really, I've been doing it for 6 years now. So it's really just a matter of working it into your weekly process. And most weeks I'm only reading one book.
Yeah. Well, I know, and I don't read a book for every show I do, but some of my shows in the research, doing the interview, and then doing the edit to bring it all together, I can easily spend 8 to 10 hours per episode.
Yes.
To make it listenable and just, the quality that we all seek in our show production. Well, add to that, then you are doing a book a week. For me, I'm probably an average speed reader. And, I would guess a marketing book would take me anywhere from 5 to 8 hours to read, to get through and to, retain and make notes on and whatever. Are you a fast reader? How long does it take you to get through a book?
I don't think I'm reading any faster than anyone else. A while ago, I thought there was a rule of thumb I had, which is that however many pages, that's how long it would take to drive that many miles here in the United States. So if it was 200 pages, maybe it was 4 hours or something like that. But some books I can read faster than others. Some books are longer. I have an interview I'm about to do with an author. It's 384 pages. The longest one was 464, but the number of pages is misleading because sometimes these books are laid out where it's a page turner. And really what I'm doing, I'm absorbing the material, and in almost every book, I'm stealing something that I can use for my company or my client, or it's an idea I can share with someone else. But I'm also sort of reading it in preparation for an interview. So in other words, I'll read a chapter and I'll think, okay, there's 2 points out of this chapter that I think the listener is really going to find helpful and or that I found funny or surprising. And the other thing I should tell you, Park, is that more often than not, when I'm reading a book, I'm thinking of jokes I can tell during the interview.
I've seen your jokes show up on LinkedIn.
Oh, that's right.
For instance. Yeah. So you're writing in the margins and you've got your jokes.
I posted some from your book.
Yes, you did.
You didn't know I was going to do that either.
Much appreciated.
Particularly the one in the book about how you were studying Cialdini's, 6 principles of influence from his bestseller Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion. And you and your long-suffering wife, you took her to a timeshare pitch. And I just thought, man, and he's still married to her, So,
in Hawaii.
Yeah. Look at sadist.
No. Now, so as long as we got to play our 4 rounds of free golf, went to their buffet, got to soak in their, pool for 4 days in a row, the cost of that was then, yes, a 3-hour timeshare pitch, but I did do it under the guise of research because I did read his book and I wanted to see, did those 6 principles play out? And by golly, if they didn't play out. Yet we escaped without signing up for a timeshare. So I consider us winners across the board.
Well played, good sir. And just because I'm probably a marketing geek like you, and we both come from this agency background from many years ago, I would probably sit in on one of those just to watch the techniques. It's like when I read a book, and it might be a book about a topic I'm already pretty familiar with. It doesn't matter because I'm going to learn something new, but also I marvel at how an author presents a certain type of material that I'm already familiar with. And particularly if it's a topic that I am explaining in the course of business, I'll see how they explain something and I think, oh, bravo. So
I'm going to borrow that. Absolutely. That's what it's all about. Well, you run an ad agency at the same time, too, while doing Marketing Book Podcast, Artillery.
Yeah, but I am, it's just where I keep going back to brand bewitchery because you talked about how beautifully explained how all that ad world kind of went away. And only somebody, well, and sometimes other people can understand this intellectually, but you and I, who had been in the agency world forever, really appreciate how, I loved it. I loved working in advertising. When I worked in New York at these big agencies, and then when I started my own agency, it was advertising, baby. And I started, as much as I didn't want to, I started noticing some serious, what seemed to be permanent changes. And
what year was this for you?
This was maybe at least by 2010.
Mm-hmm.
I was, the denial is not just a river in Egypt. I was still chugging along with advertising clients, and I like doing that. I could still get paid to have media commissions, and we were doing all kinds of things and helping these clients. But I saw where it was all starting to go, and I think that was 2010. I don't know. There was a bit of a period in the wilderness, to use a storytelling motif.
The dark night of the soul.
Yes, thank you. Said much better than me. But I thought, this must have been what it was like for a travel agent about 25 years ago. Suddenly, they were saying, wait a minute, why are the airlines not paying us a commission anymore? In our world, why does Google not pay us a commission? I got commissions from all the media. And, the travel agent might have been saying, how can somebody make travel plans without me? This internet thing. I mean, come on, Park. You and I know that this internet thing is still a fad.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So that's why when you wrote about that, it was one of those instances where I knew exactly what you were talking about, and about 10 times more than maybe just the average reader. I had lived that. Yeah. And honestly, I am kind of joking about this wilderness that I went through, but I'm sure a storytelling expert would be able to parse this out. But what happened with me is that I started to have to go to client meetings, and I was having to bring website people, and I was getting a lot of questions about this interweb thing, and a lot of questions, increasing questions about this, what we both know is a fad, social media. And so I started to feel really irrelevant. And I felt like I was growing dinosaur scales, and it really, really bothered me, maybe more than the average person. There was some issue I had there, and it really was a kind of a dark period. And what I had done was, after I got out of the Army after the Civil War, I went back to school. If I was in the war,
I just can't let that one go. That was good.
If I was in the war, it was the Cold War. I was over in Germany, and the Soviets did not invade while I was there. You're welcome.
Damn.
And but I went back to school. I'd never taken a business course as an undergrad. I was an English major, and so all I knew is that I didn't want to be in the Army anymore. And I thought, oh gosh, if there was only one lesson I learned as a young person, this is applicable to any of your listeners. If you can find something that kind of interests you, you're going to do better at it. And so I knocked around, started reading a lot of different books about basically different careers and things like that. And this was, as I said, after the Civil War, before we had this email and World Wide Web. This was the mid 80s. And one of my buddies I'd been in the Army with, he had said he was living in New York, working on Wall Street. He knew a lot of people that worked in advertising. He said, have you ever thought about doing that? And I said, no, I don't know anything about advertising. So I went back to school and I asked this one professor who'd worked in advertising. I said, all right, what's one book I could read so I could determine if this interests me or not? And she gave me a copy of what was a pretty new book at the time called Ogilvy on Advertising, which I'm sure Park Howell has read a few times. And I read that and I said, I love it. That is it. That is what I'm going to go do. Oh my goodness. Because I got out of the Army, I didn't quite know what I was going to do. Okay, so fast forward to this change of the advertising gravy train was coming to a stop. And I thought, oh, what am I going to do? So I turned back to books and started reading and, finding out what I could. And I stumbled upon the first or second edition of David Meerman Scott's bestseller, The New Rules of Marketing and PR. And it was a similar feeling where after I read that, I said, that's where it's all going. I felt like I had a second bite at the career apple. And I was too young and immature to retire. I'm still too immature. But I thought, that's where it's all going. And it was sort of like maybe 500 years ago, somebody having explained to them that the earth actually rotates around the sun instead of the sun around the earth. And it all becomes much clearer. And so I saw where it was going, and I took off, and it was really, again, another high point. But I remember thinking, I don't ever want to get caught off guard. I've got to do something where I can feel like I kind of know what's going on here, because it really made me sick. So that's
now to finish. Before you finish that thought, I want to go back to when I read a book, I will pull out 1, 2, maybe 3 nuggets out of all of the pages and go, this is my core finding in this particular read. And, there's plenty of supporting facts. What was it about that book? What was like the one thing that woke you up?
I had made a really good living in the advertising industrial complex, which was based largely, as did Park Howell, which was based largely on media gatekeepers. So in other
And
words,
you were in New York for J. Walter Thompson, Gray Advertising, big agencies.
yeah,
What did you do? Were you a creative, an account guy,
I was
a
an account
planner?
executive. Yeah. Account supervisor. And I worked on these really famous brands and
Such as
Panasonic whisk detergent, Lever 2000 deodorant soap, Toys R Us. Gosh,
so you were
yeah.
a madman
Oh,
guy.
I was
You
a
were a
madman.
man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was a madman guy, except when I was there at the tail end of the madman era, there was not all this smoking, drinking, and screwing going on. I either that or, I just wasn't asked to play in the reindeer games. But so that was the media gatekeeper world where it was all about relationships with the media. If we wanted to get a message out through the news media, all these kinds of things you would do through all the mechanics of putting together press tours and all that sort of thing. Advertising, we had a captive audience back then, and there was a correlation often between a bigger ad budget and a client's market share increasing. I mean, it was just that powerful, and people couldn't skip our ads. And I mean, these were the good old days. So to answer your question about David Meerman Scott's book is I understood that all those media gates had fallen and that you can go straight to your customers and you can build your own audience. And just like me, I mean, even a knuckleheaded podcaster, I can get build a podcast and have listeners in over 150 countries and know that I'm helping people. So that was the biggest takeaway from that book I did sort of understand maybe the idea of the earth rotating around the sun rather than the converse.
And the same sort of aha moment for me, I started searching in 2006, and it took me a few years to find that answer. But I really sum it up in saying, in our days, the old days of traditional advertising and marketing, our clients, the brands we represented, owned the influence of mass media with a captive audience. But once technology showed up, the masses became the media. Yeah. You and I, we get to be our own TV stations, our own radio stations, our own print production house. We get to do it 24/7 from the quiet of our own kitchen table, and we have global reach. So, by the way, can everybody else? So we have this absolute cacophony of communication now that we all compete in, and brands no longer have that strength like they used to have.
Absolutely. And the scarcity issue back then was money, because it was all about space, buying space. And now it's gone to attention. So there might be over 1 million podcasts now, I think I've heard. And it troubles me, and I guess I kind of laugh it off, but so many people think they still have a captive audience. And I mean, it's always a struggle with clients who are very self-oriented. I mean, humans are self-oriented, so I don't mean that's an observation, not a criticism. But I interviewed Tom Fishburne a couple of years ago. He's the marketoonist, the cartoonist. He writes these, he produces these just amazing cartoons about marketers. And he's a Harvard Business School graduate. He worked at a number of blue chip companies as a marketer. And I interviewed him about that book, and that book was all cartoons, so it didn't take me quite as long to read, just an answer to your listener when asked question. But really interesting guy, and I still follow him very closely. And his book was about his first 15 years as a cartoonist, and it was almost like watching a documentary about the evolution of the last 15 years. He put them all in there chronologically, the best ones. But during that interview, I said, I think cartooning is probably even more difficult than writing. I don't know. It just seems really, really challenging. And I asked him, what do you do? Are there any things that you go to for inspiration? And he said, yes. One of the things is that I never run out of ways to make fun of marketers or companies who think they still have a captive audience.
There's gold in them there hills, huh?
Yeah. So now you have to be, because everyone can be a media company, you have to be interesting, because you can no longer interrupt what people are interested in. You have to be helpful, educational, entertaining, things like that.
And you have to have a point of view. I mean, you really have to have a very solid niche in a business in the world to be able to occupy that category in your customer's head, in your listener's head, whatever. You've got that with a Marketing Book Podcast. I don't know if you even have competition in that area. In that I've not seen another show like yours so specifically focused on what you do, and that's sharing the insights of these great books you read and bringing the authors on. That's hugely important to any brand, isn't it?
Yeah, oh, absolutely, absolutely. And what I've done, of course, I do everything unconsciously, is that nobody else wants to start a podcast where you're going to spend, like you do, 5 to 8 hours a week preparing. But I mean, it's good for me, I could be out causing trouble, but instead I'm reading these books. I'm still causing trouble, and I'm able to, joke around and have fun. And I, Park, one of the greatest subconscious motivators, I'm sure, is that I know I'm helping people, and everybody feels better when they know they're helping somebody. And I hear from listeners almost every day around the world saying, "Hey, I've been listening to your show for a couple of years. I really appreciate it. Great ideas. Please don't stop doing it." And I'm like, "Oh, great. Now I got to keep doing this thing."
Now you're guilted into it.
But what I have done unconsciously is I've built quite a moat. And
how so?
Well, because I'm wondering if maybe the barriers to entry are higher, because it's like, it's a different interview when you don't read the book versus when you do read the book. And it's just kind of the way I do it. It's no secret sauce. I'm just doing it.
It's effort. I mean, you have to put in the time to make that happen.
It's true, but there's the benefits to me, I think, are more than what I put in, because it really is professional development as performance art. And I know I'm helping other people, and I'm helping authors, helping them in a small way, getting some awareness of their books. And it probably hasn't happened with you, but I know for a fact that I have interviewed authors on the Marketing Book Podcast. Somebody listens to that interview, hires them for a paid speaking gig. So it's probably not happening lately during this, lockdown and coronavirus, but I hope that that'll help the authors, in the future, because I'm like a sports reporter that just pinches myself that I get to interview these athletes. And I have such admiration for people who write these books. And I don't know that I'm ever going to write a book. Heck, I'm too busy reading them.
Well, and you get the major players on there. Just had Seth Godin on. And I noticed somewhere in one of your presentations, someone asked you probably get this question all the time, is what is your favorite book? And I was surprised to see that you had Sarah Cooper on, her 100 Tricks to Appear Smart. And I can totally appreciate why you like that. Not that you were trying to use her tricks. It's just very, very funny.
It's very, very funny. And as a matter of fact, she has a daily calendar coming out for 2021, and I actually have a copy of it here. It's already gift wrapped for Christmas for this one client who is a big fan of hers, and I gave him her book, 100 Tricks to Appear Smart in Meetings. This will be 365 tricks, but we're getting ready to send it off to him. But actually, the truth is, I like that book quite a bit. She was a comedian at Google, or she's a comedian. And she became even more famous because she would take the audio of President Trump, and then she would act out what. Oh, it was so funny.
Brilliant. And very funny. Have you seen her show on Netflix?
No, I haven't. I should do that. Yeah.
They've got a special with her on. It's pretty good.
Yeah. I mentioned that in a presentation because I always get asked to come and say, "Hey, what are some things you've learned from all these books you've read?" And, I try to make it helpful for people, because otherwise I'd say, well, Park Howell's dad was an engineer. I have all this hard drive space taken up with, what might be unimportant to a lot of people, except maybe the
That's
author.
where the scotch drinking comes in to help you just kind of parse through that information.
But at the beginning so they'll say, so I give a presentation every milestone, like, the 5 ideas that matter most for marketers from the first 300 books. I gave that about 2 weeks ago to this one group. And sometimes I'll start the talk and I'll say, okay, all right, before we go any further, I'm going to answer a question I always get. And what is the one book, Doug? What is the one book I should read? What's the best book? And I'm making fun of that question because there's no context. So people really do ask me that all the time. And I say, well, what challenges do you have? Or, what do you want to learn more about? And then I'm able to pick out, I don't want somebody like Park Howell to have to read 300 books. If there's one or two that I can put you on immediately, again, I like to help people. So I'll say it's Sarah. I say, was it a book by Seth Godin or David Meerman Scott or Philip Kotler, the father of modern marketing? Well, they all write spectacular books, and many other authors do too, but it's Sarah Cooper, 100 Tricks to Appear Smart in Meetings. And then I show some of the tricks. And one of the tricks in her book is when you're sitting there in a conference room and you're not really paying attention, just ask the presenter to go back one slide, unless it's the first slide. Okay, you do kind of have to think about this, but you stop, you say, hey, Park, can you go back a slide? And immediately everyone thinks you're paying more attention than they are. And then you've got like another 45 minutes of checking Instagram on your phone, Or the other one is, another good one is she says, translate percentages into fractions. So if somebody says about 25% of visitors to our site click on this button, you then say, so about 1 in 4. Your math skills will be the envy of everyone in that room. So the whole book is full of things like that. And that one about the 25%, some executive at Yahoo said that, and she thought he was joking, and she didn't laugh. And then she realized everyone was very serious. That's when she started writing all these things down. And then she later went to work for Google, and then she went out on her own. She's an engineer from Georgia Tech. But very, very funny.
It's like the Delbert of presentation mode. She can sit there and take it all, take it all in and make fun of it. Yeah, because so much of it is so bizarre. Well, then, of course, I'm going to ask you that same question. The 5 top things that you have taken away in 300 books. But let me put it into context then. Okay. Since this is Business of Story, and people come here presumably to understand how they can do a better job of telling a story. So of all the different books, whether they were books on storytelling or not, and you are a gifted storyteller. You just do it by trade. You stand-up comedy. You have fun. So of what you learned.
We're done here. Park Howell.
You can borrow that.
Okay.
Yeah, I can shorten that quote a little bit for you if you like. What would you say of the ones that come to mind might be the top 3, 4, or 5 tips on communicating and storytelling or using story in the world of marketing or boring presentations to make them interesting?
Well, storytelling is sort of like the opposite of kryptonite. It's just so unbelievably powerful. And by reading, maybe a half dozen books that have been about storytelling, as well as a few others where they talk about the brain, it is it's an unfair advantage if you do it. But let me offer a word of caution. And we actually talked about this when I interviewed you about brand bewitchery. When I talk about maybe 5 things that every marketer ought to know, the first thing is very controversial, and I am always concerned I'm going to get thrown off the stage. And that is marketers have an image problem. And I talk about civilians, and civilians mean anybody that's not in the marketing department. And there are a lot of very, very important things that modern marketers know about, like content marketing, storytelling, building a brand, all those kinds of things. Do not talk about that around civilians. If you are talking about storytelling and you're saying that to other executives that don't understand what that means, they're not going to tell you they don't understand. They're going to start to lump you in. There's a risk that you can be lumped in with that group, 80% of marketers who are often misperceived as arts and crafts party planners who work in the make it pretty department. And I've got quote after quote from books talking about why that is not helpful for marketers. So I would say that storytelling is one of the very most important things, but I would, and for instance, let's say you're developing collateral materials for your sales team or for your website. And this is where I'm getting into Park Howell area here, but rather than leading with products, which most of us want to do, remember I said great quote from David Merman Scott, no one cares about your product or service except you. We don't. We really don't.
Yeah.
So if you are able to use storytelling, but again, if it were me, I would keep that word to myself and develop even a sell sheet or content on a website or advertisements or whatever. And I focused first on the problem the customer has. You're going to have an unfair advantage. If you come out and say our widgets are shiny, no
Nobody
context.
cares.
Yeah. And that's where the storytelling, I mean, if I were on the marketing, on the client side, I almost wouldn't want to reveal all these tricks about storytelling.
Exactly. I mean, it's like a magician. A magician doesn't show you how they make the rabbit disappear or appear. They just do the trick.
Yes.
And storytelling has that way. Well, that's why I call it brand bewitchery. The applied science and bewitchery of storytelling. Use these techniques to bewitch an audience, but never start with something. Let me tell you a story, Douglas. Because what's the first thing that happens? Just what you did right there. I don't have time for a story. This is going to be BS.
Yeah.
He's going to try to manipulate me with his story. Just tell the story.
Well, speaking of that, Park, if I could, let me just toss something back to you. Can you tell the story that's in your book about how that first time you were there for that business course, I'm not using the right terms, and they were on, I don't know, they were on logistics, they were on HR, other categories for all these managers, and you were there, and they thought, oh, okay, here's the arts and crafts party planner.
Oh, yeah.
My words, not yours. And their arms were crossed. And I just thought that I saw myself in that story, and I saw listeners in that story. Can you take it?
Yeah.
Turn the tables here.
Real quick, I was at Arizona State University, and I was working with 3 other professors as we were creating a curriculum for the Executive Masters for Sustainability Leadership, an Executive Masters program where we worked with leaders from around the world. Philips Electronics involved, Cummins Diesel, American Express, whatever. 12-month program, and I was brought in to create the communications curriculum specifically on how can we use story to help these executives advance their social initiatives internally further faster. That was the bottom line. That was the goal. And so ASU had flown in all these experts in sustainability as we were creating the curriculum for us to bounce our ideas off of them so that we could hear from the market. What kind of graduates are you all looking for and will hire so that they would inform the creation of our curriculum? So we had it roughed out, and the first 3 professors went ahead of me, and one was on global supply chain management. The other one was on global impact, what you do here and how it impacts someone, halfway around the world. Third one was on leadership from Dr. Kevin Gazzara from Intel. So, big thinkers in this. And then they invite the ad guy up. Park Howell, adjunct professor, now never taught a course in my life, and I got to hand it to ASU to free us up to treat it, let us teach it as we know it as practitioners. And when they introduced me, it was in the afternoon, and these folks had been there all day long. It was after lunch, and they introduced me as a communications guy. And Douglas, to your point, you could see vast majority of them settle back in their chair and cross their arms. And the one guy in the front row looks at his guy next to him and says, oh, it's the soft skills guy. And then a chuckle happens throughout the room. Yes. And I just that was an awakening for me. I did not realize that there was such a disconnect between the hard skills of technology and measurable this, and how they look down on the soft skills of communications and relationships and building camaraderie and sharing a vision that people will actually buy into. And so, yeah, and I went on and I actually created a little algorithm for that group because I realized I was speaking from a bunch of left brain scientists, engineering nerds. And I can't even remember exactly what the algorithm was now, but I turned and I asked them, I said, when was the last time you bought anything because of the data? And they all looked at me and they had to actually process that for a minute. You don't buy into anything unless you have emotionally first bought into the context and the impact of what they're selling. You only use the data to support that decision. So that was my way to get over it. But boy, have I really worked on that hard skill, soft skill divide in the last 5 or 6 years that I've been working with Business of Story. And I think I'm gaining ground on it. A lot more engineers are showing up to learn how they can improve their soft skills through story.
And that's why I feel strongly that I think a lot of marketers may not realize how they're being perceived. And of course, the antidote to that is to get in the revenue camp and talk about those things. But was it I'm sorry, because the books run together on storytelling, but was it your book that had the question of, when you married your wife, did you have a spreadsheet that analyzed everything? That was not.
No.
I'm sorry. It must have been another one. It was some other. There's a lot of Scotchen books that are kind of sloshing around in my head.
Yeah.
But there was one where they talked about this same point. They were trying. They came at a different angle, and they said, when you were considering marriage partners, did you put all the data into spreadsheets and run a regression analysis, or did you have pivot tables or something like that? And that kind of
those only come later. Right. No, you what is the size of her foot? No. Could you even say what the size of her foot was?
Could you need that glass slipper,
Could you tell us what the length of her inseam was? I mean, yeah. Do you know her exact height and weight?
And
no,
and
that's not what you base it on. No, not necessarily. Yeah. So it's a very good point. Very good point. It's we don't buy, I went to Robert McKee's famous story conference over in LA. It's a screenwriting thing, 4 days of Robert McKee, a legendary screenwriting coach. And I was one of like 4 marketers sitting in a room full of about 250 wannabe screenwriters learning from the master himself. And he said something that day that has stuck with me forever. And it's what we're talking about here. And he says, you never lose sight of, as a writer, understanding your audience, that we Homo sapiens, our frontal cortex is simply the PR department for our subconscious, where all the real decisions are being made.
Yes.
So we buy with emotion and we justify that purchase with our logical noggin. Emotion comes from stories. It doesn't come from spreadsheets.
Absolutely. And it's funny, your book still stays with me because just this week I was editing an interview with Stephen Denny, he's a co-author of Unfiltered Marketing. And in the interview, he said, he'd been a marketer for many, many years. And he said, I went to a Robert McKee seminar and I was one of the few marketers there. And I said, oh, I know who Robert McKee is. Yeah. So, based on your book, and there may have been, no, it was your book, but also there was another book that was on the show after yours called Unleash Your Primal Brain by Tim Ash. And it's not a marketing or sales book, but it talks about the evolution of the human brain. So as you can imagine, storytellers love that book. And so it's not a marketing or sales book, but every single chapter was extremely relevant to anyone in marketing or sales. And he even goes into why storytelling is just, a secret sauce. So, and why our brains do that, and completely scientific, the whole thing. So, yeah,
I'll have to read that. I saw that on your show list.
Yeah,
I thought that's one I got to pick up. And
happy to introduce you.
Yeah, I would like to. He'd be great to have on the show. One other point. So do you have another thing that resonates with you from the books you've read that storytellers, marketers could, benefit from?
The most successful companies, the most successful marketers, the most successful salespeople have the deepest understanding of their customers. Period. End of stop. And I can show you why. And empathy is so difficult for people and for companies, but just story and case study after case study shows that the more insights you have into your customers' latent anxieties and desires, to quote Philip Kotler, the more successful you're going to be. And what are you going to be successful at? Well, for starters, they're going to let you into their attention span. You're going to break through there. And there was a book. I said this. Yeah, there was a book. There are a lot of books, and I love all the books. And here's why: I get to pick which ones I want to read. But there was a book by Tiffany Bova from Salesforce called Growth IQ, and it was basically, it laid out all the 10, basically more or less 10 different ways that companies grow. And there have been some other books that talk about that, but hers put it together, and she added in a couple of more modern ones. And she then goes through and shows like the darlings that you see in all marketing books, Amazon, Starbucks, whatever. And she even picked out some of the darlings and showed this is where they screwed up. It's not always a success story, REI or whatever. And so she, and like the 10 different ways, like one of them is improve the experience that your customers have. In fact, that's the first one. She shows example after example of what a lot of the hospitality industry knows is that if you give people a better experience, they're going to like you and they're going to come back. But I think the second one was sell more of your current products to your current customers, which is just really hard for companies to understand. But anyway, she goes through all 10. Every single one of those 10 in her book, the ones that succeeded had one thing in common, and that is they understood their customers better.
Bottom line.
Yeah. And
they've taken the time to really understand their persona and to empathize with their customers. Where is that customer on their journey, either within your industry, within their wish and want in the world, or even with you, and what stories do you share with them and then deliver on those promises in your story?
Absolutely. And let me tell you a real quick story. One of my favorite books on the podcast is Buyer Personas by Adele Ravella. And we use, and at the heart of her book, she talks about these 5 rings of insight, these 5 insights that if you know them, and if you know them just a little bit better than the competition, again, you will have an unfair advantage. So we use that for new clients where my content director will go and interview customers. And 30-minute interview. He's a former journalist. He knows how to get to what he needs. And he probes for these 5 insights. Okay, so we come back to a client, and we tell the client what we're going to be doing. And the client says one of 2 things, if not both. One is they say, wow, you really understand our customers. The second thing they say is, they sometimes say is, my goodness, I forgot how much goes on in our customers' lives before they come to us.
Well, they actually have a life before they showed up at our store. Huh?
And there's kind of a story about what happens and how their product or service is really one of the things that comes along later.
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, we can learn from the ancient Greek story of Narcissus. It is not about staring at your navel as a brand. You are going to die looking into that mirror, pond, looking at your own image. You have to get out of your head, and you got to understand what's happening with your customers.
Yeah, and there have been a number of books on the show that talk about the linchpin of the entire book. Like there's a book called Roadmap to Revenue or Small by Christian Zhivago or Small Data by Martin Lindstrom or just any number of them. And they talk about how, like Roadmap to Revenue, for instance, she shows how it's worked really well over the years for a company to grow their revenue. The linchpin of the whole thing is interviewing customers. And none of the book works if you don't go and interview your customers. And she even shows you these are the kind of things you should be probing for. These are the kind of things you shouldn't be probing for. And one of the things she says, like others, is don't let your salespeople do it. They're busy. They have other skills, and they're trained. They're trained to kill. They're trained to sell. So that's why. One last story. I'm sorry. I feel like you've unleashed all these these stories.
I told you, you're a natural.
There was a listener there is a listener in New Zealand, and he had been in marketing earlier in his career, and then he wanted to get back into that. He wasn't in it while he was listening to the Marketing Book podcast. So he started messaging me, and he says, "Hey, I decided I want to get back into marketing, and I've listened to a lot of your episodes and listened to these authors, and I'm interviewing now, and I've actually mentioned several things I've learned from your show, and I think I'm going to get this job. So thanks." And I'm thinking, well, most of these people that listen to that kind of show, they're kind of sharp anyway. They're self starters, and they want to learn more.
Motivated.
Yeah. So he ends up getting the job. And a few months later, he told me I got the job. And he said, because I get questions from listeners, again, nearly every day saying, what's a book I could read about this topic or that topic? Or they'll tell me what their problem is, or whatever is. It just takes us a few seconds to answer them, and I write a book prescription. So he said, "Hey, all right, I'm working for this. It was some sort of high-tech water filtration, business-to-business, industrial sort of thing." He goes, "What's a book I could read about to learn more about that?" I said, "Well, I have no idea. I'm sure there are books in all kinds of academic journals, but let me make a suggestion." At your company, you've got technical experts, engineers, all that sort of thing. They are going to forget more about that product than you're ever probably going to learn. Why don't you go and become the customer expert? Learn as much as you can about that customer. And I gave him a couple of books, and made a few suggestions. And lo and behold, a few months later, he comes back and says, "My goodness, it worked. I'm attending all the meetings now. And when I speak, they're listening. Even the engineers."
Isn't that awesome? That is awesome.
But he went off and did his own research. And this is a really important point for marketers. I know I sound like their dad, but don't wait for someone to go tell you to do that. Go become an expert on your customer, and you're going to be amazed at how quickly you can do that and how enormously helpful it is.
Without a doubt. Great point. And going back to what you're saying, that's why you do your show. Helping folks. Right. I mean, really think you laugh at that, but look at that impact you're having clear around the world with total strangers that plug, you into their earballs for that intimate discussion, and they take that advice, and that's the kind of impact you have on your show. So I, commend you for that. That's
Thanks.
Good stuff, Douglas.
It's really fulfilling to know that I'm helping folks. But the truth is, Park, my kids who are now in their early 20s, they still think Dad's kind of an idiot and doesn't really know that much. And
they don't listen to the show either, do they?
No. And all they know is I have a lot of Twitter followers, and that seems to be the only.
And TikTok, you're just killing it on TikTok, aren't you?
I'm not even on that.
Neither am I.
And I check Instagram once a year, so I really am kind of uncool, I guess.
Well, Douglas, thanks so much for being here. One last question for you. Given that this is wacko year 2020, the year of COVID and all that, and everything that you've read just in this year, has what we have all collectively been going through with the pandemic, has it changed the way you look at marketing? And even from how you are filtering the content that's coming in, for instance, do some books maybe feel like they might be out of step because our landscape in marketing may or may not have changed quite a bit given what's going on with the pandemic? Has there been any sort of aha moment around that with all of what you've digested this year in your marketing book, in the Marketing Book podcast?
Park, everything's changed. No, I'm kidding. I think that there's a great story I learned about Jeff Bezos, and he was saying that one of the reasons they've been successful is because they don't focus on the things that change. Because things are going to change, technology, all kinds of things. They focus on the things that aren't ever going to change. And the more books I read, the more I start to see this pattern. And there's a lot of history repeating itself sort of dynamic where there are a few core things that make how a company markets and sells and grows the same. There's been technology this year that's come along, and it's going to continue to get better and better. I think that sales may have a bit of a permanent change in that a lot of people in outside sales have realized they didn't really need to get on that airplane to go visit the prospect the first time. They didn't need to go take them to lunch. They realized that this actually saves everyone time, and they might be able to help. So that's one where it may change, but the fundamentals of selling now, and really ever in the past, is: are you helping them achieve some goal? Are you helping them to make a decision that's going to help them? So I have had books on the show during the year that had to do with very topical subjects: virtual meetings, communicating in a virtual world, virtual selling in place, things like that. But I think that the fundamentals really haven't changed, and we've touched on a number of them right here. And one of the challenges, though, for, I guess, humans, or for marketers are humans. I know what you listeners are thinking, but is that we get distracted by things very easily. And the latest shiny disco ball or the squirrel, and the fact is, if you're able to focus on the basics, all the other stuff works well. But it's something where maybe it's a forest for the trees things where we're able to go in, or an outsider like yourself is able to go in and help point out things that are pretty obvious, but really difficult for them to see. And, we're probably the same way.
Mm-hmm. Oh. Well, fascinating. Douglas Burdett, thank you for being here on Business of Story, host of the Marketing Book podcast. Where can people find out more about you, your show, and all the cool stuff you're doing out there?
They can go to marketingbookpodcast.com, and that's the section of our agency site that is all about the podcast, so you don't have to wade through our homepage and all that sort of thing. And also, let me do this. If there are any of your listeners who, if I can ever recommend a one or two books that, for whatever challenge they're facing right now, connect with me on LinkedIn. Please include a message so I won't mistake you for a spammer and ignore you. But say, hey, I'm one of Park's listeners, and then we'll chat on LinkedIn. And it's so much fun being able to be a resource for people. It's the fun thing I get to do all day. And so I would say connect with me on LinkedIn, or you can go to Marketing Book Podcast, or just like your show, the podcast is available wherever fine podcasts are downloaded, like Spotify and iTunes.
Listen to in over 150 countries, helping Kiwis land that ideal job. Douglas Burdett. Thanks, and thank you all for listening to this edition of The Business of Story. If you liked what you heard, and how could you help but not like Douglas Burdett, share this show, share this episode with your friends, family, colleagues. Help spread the word out there. And if I can be of service to you, you know where to find me, businessofstory.com. Until next week, when we will have another amazing story artist right back here for you like Douglas, remember that the most potent story you'll ever tell is a story you tell yourself. So make it a great one. Thanks for listening.
This was more fun than I should have been allowed to have.